Welcome to another Rosterfy webinar. My name is Martin O'Neill. I'm the head of marketing for Rosterfy. Today, we've got a great webinar. We've got a really important topic to cover, turning doers into donors. Now, we know that our volunteer community offer so much support when it comes to the hours and the effort and the skills that they put in, but there is a huge opportunity that awaits nonprofits, charities, and community programs in engaging with that volunteer audience to encourage donations. So today is a half an hour session. There will be a Q&A for the session, and really that just means scanning this QR code. It pops up on your phone, and you can enter questions to our guest, who I'll introduce in a moment, and I'll be able to see those questions and relay them back to our guest. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to shout them in through that QR code, and I'm sure we can try and answer them as we go. So today's guest speaker is Chris Guazdo. I've worked with Chris a few times now, and SJ Consulting are a marvelous agent consultancy that we work with, who have done some truly brilliant work in the nonprofit space. They've got so much experience when it comes to engaging with communities and helping nonprofits and charities make more strategic decision making. So before I hand over to Chris, I'm just going to quickly go over what we're going to cover in today's webinar too. It's going to be a 30-minute session. And like I said, there'll be an opportunity for questions as we go. And today we'll be covering communication strategies, because we know communication is super important when it comes to engagement. Framing the impact of your program and what that can mean to your potential for donor generation, and also the role that technology plays, because technology plays a role in every webinar that you watch. But what does it mean to have the right systems in place? What does a right system look like? And what can you do internally to encourage other people to be part of this too? So before I hand over to Chris, there's a stat that I only found out this week. I was doing a little bit of research and found this, which is only 14% of new donors in 2024 went on to repeat that donation in 2025. I find this fascinating. And to be honest, this really speaks to the fact that there may have been quite a lot of opportunities where you've managed to convince somebody to support your cause. So you've made that donation, but because of the lack of engagement, or perhaps the lack of communication, they just disappeared off into the ether and they never came back into your community. In a webinar where we're talking about how to encourage more donations from your volunteer base, I think this stat is super important, because it means that if you do speak to an engaged community, that you're much more likely to retain that donation and keep people coming back for more, both in the hours that they give and the donations that they give. We know that nonprofits, particularly nonprofits in North America, we can't survive without those donations. And as the growing trend is for those donations to be tailing off, then why not benefit from the fact that volunteering is on the up? So I'm going to hand over to Chris shortly. Chris, can you jump on your screen and your mic, and I will switch control over to you. But it's lovely to see you again, Chris.
You as well, Martin. Thank you for the kind words. And that statistic is amazing, scary in a lot of ways. But I agree with your point. I love to see that stat broken out to new volunteers who have donated, or volunteers who are new donors, right? And their, what their stat would be the following year. So I think it'd be quite different.
Yeah, so absolutely.
We'll definitely get into that.
Cool. Well, over to you, Chris. I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to cover today.
Sounds great. I think I just need to share. You need to.
We're going to hop over to Chris's screen and his presentation.
I think you might need to make me the presenter.
Oh, sorry. Have I not done that? No. I was hogging glory and all the presenting. There you go. There we go.
All right. Well, thank you, Martin, for the kind words. My name is Chris Guasdo. I'm a strategic consultant and a project manager with SJ Consulting. I've worked in the nonprofit space. We'll just say over 20 years and leave it at that. I was with this little company called Blackbaud back in the day as a razor's edge consultant. I was around when Net Community was a brand new application. I was a consultant for that as well. I was a managing consultant, and I spent the latter half of my 14 years as a principal consultant with them over various areas of their professional services group. I joined SJ Consulting as a project manager and a strategic consultant, and do some development work in the digital and the CRM space. And I'm fortunate enough to participate in nonprofit webinars and panels like this. So it's great to be here. A little bit about SJ Consulting. Julie Gibson, who's a colleague of mine. I was actually working with her well before the founding in 2006 of SJ Consulting. She also worked at Blackbaud. It's a woman-owned small business. We've helped many, many nonprofits with many projects, both CRM, digital, strategic, customizations from a digital standpoint, help them raise over 25 billion in fundraising over that time. It is our mantra, basically, that we are so driven by our passion for helping nonprofits succeed. That's what drives us. So let's jump in. The volunteers. So I see volunteers, they're the mild-mannered folks who are actually superheroes, right? In the context of cultivation, they're the most passionate and invested and committed constituents we have. So especially in light of the statistic that Martin mentioned, more and more we're looking at them as a means of cultivation, right? We're looking at turning them into donors, and in any endeavor such as this that we're working on, I like to put things in more of a strategic framework, in this case from a communication standpoint. So we're going to go into each one of these areas in turn. I'm a data geek, so I start with where's the data and what is it telling us and can we use it? And then taking a step back a moment and creating the vision, what are we looking to accomplish? Is it long or short term? And then the importance of articulating it internally. And then once we have that, we can come up with the tactical plan. And again, we'll go through each one of these in turn. So I'm the guy on the project jumping up and down saying, show me the data, right? Is it in one place? How can we make it meaningful, right? Do we already know what volunteers are already donating? Are they in the CRM already? Do we have a separate volunteer list somewhere? Can we somehow segment on recency, or whether they're a new or a long-term volunteer, what their interests are? Is there an events list somewhere that the volunteers may also be a part of? And do we have access to that? Is it integrated with the primary CRM? So again, on it goes through email or other in-house solutions, peer-to-peer, whatever other data sources your organization has. Can we get to the data? Ideally, it's all in the primary CRM, that place of truth, but more often than not, they're spread out, right? So it begs the question, do we create an integrated system? Maybe it's a larger project of integrating data into the primary CRM. Many times it's, hey, what can we do immediately? Can we bring this disparate data together to make sense of it, to potentially use it and segment with it? So data is a big piece of the puzzle here. It'll show what possibilities we have in terms of segmentation and how personal we can get. So we take a step back, look at it from a vision standpoint. Are we doing short-term or long-term? Either way, whichever approach, we still go through this framework, right? I worked with an organization that they were looking for a rather short-term, call it a hit. They were running a little behind on a capital campaign, and they wanted to basically reach out to their volunteers and make that appeal, right? So, not a whole lot of time to do a lot of the data stuff. We work with what we have, but the same approach works, whether it's long-term or short-term. It's also a good time to think of the ideals, right? How do you want the volunteer experience to be, to change, to improve? So a great way of doing this is reviewing every touch. It might be worthwhile even registering as a new volunteer and walking through that to see what they're seeing, and then contrast that with what you want that culture to look like. Certainly, as you go through this, and even overall communications, what's the meaning, the tone, the gratitude, etc. What is it that we're looking to convey? And we'll get more into that, because impact reporting and techniques around that, of finding what that ideal meaning and gratitude and tone is key. And this step is skipped quite a bit. And this essentially is your elevator pitch. Can you articulate what the vision is to internal folks, right? Ideally, you want to proactively answer the question, what the heck are you doing, right? I was on site with a hospital foundation years ago, and this was unrelated to the project that I was on. But apparently, the director of development walked into the volunteers area and said we're sending an email to your volunteers for an appeal, right? And I didn't witness this, but I heard both sides. It didn't go well, to say the least. The volunteer folks were very upset, and the fundraising folks were, they were kind of very, very tense. They're kind of battling it out for quite a bit. It was kind of like West Side Story. You get the Sharks and the Jets, but there's no pretty music or dancing, right? So it was pretty tense. And for those of you who are not old enough to recall West Side Story, it's an interesting movie from the last century, basically about gang violence in New York City, but they made it to a musical. So there's dancing and singing. Very iconic movie, worth a watch, but ultimately, needless to say, it didn't go well, right? So articulating that vision internally is key, because volunteers are so important, and I haven't met a volunteer manager or director who isn't protective of their team. So, moving forward and throughout the rest of this presentation, this is the phrase that I use, right? Let's invite our volunteers to become more involved, right? Not, hey, we're going to send an appeal to them. Not, we're going to email blast them, for a donation. It's now invite them to become more involved. It's a nicer way of saying it. So, sample vision.
Sorry, Chris, I just want to chip in, just because we got a question actually that was very relevant that popped through. So, what advice would you give somebody asking for data across other teams? Some people can be a little bit protective, and as you were just as you were talking about West Side Story, I felt like it was probably a good time to chip that in. Clearly, that is an issue.
Yes, great question. In fact, one of the additional thoughts that I have on this presentation is, definitely get an executive sponsor. Because if you can create this vision, articulate it, even if it's a one-page business plan, we'll discuss that as well, and have an articulate vision, approaching them with all of that is much better and much easier. Now, obviously you can't guarantee the outcome, but certainly it's hard to argue with our volunteer engagement vision centers on intentional recognition and progressive involvement opportunities at every touch point. This relationship first approach cultivates deeper commitment, converting volunteers into mission ambassadors and donors, thereby strengthening both our volunteer base and our fundraising capacity. Now, that might be a bit much, and you're more than welcome to, crib that and make it your own. But that's a much better starting point for a conversation than, hey, you got any data over there for your volunteers that are in there, because we want to ping them, But yeah, I think the articulation is key. Having executive sponsorship, having even a small, even executive level plan, written, makes that much easier to approach. Any other questions, Martin?
Not just yet. No.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, it was a great question. So once the vision is clearly in mind and we understand the data situations, right, the limitations and opportunities that are in the data, we can create the tactical plan. So we're going to go into each one of these individually, but obviously we're going to use multi-channel. Is it consistent? Is it a continuation of the offline experience for volunteers? We're going to go into impact reporting, very, very powerful, effective tool, making that connection. And then putting it all together in the actual segmentation and the journeys that each segment can take potentially. And all of this is setting the stage, right? It's setting the foundation ultimately to invite our volunteers to become more involved. Again, code for turning them into donors, but it's a nicer way of saying it. So it goes without saying that you're going to be using all these goodies, right? Email, social media, your website, if you have an online portal for volunteers, these are essentially the tools. Does it reflect the offline experience that volunteers have? Does it match the tone, the feel, the vibe? Obviously, the goal here is to highlight what they love about volunteering and bring it into these touch points to make it more meaningful, because they're going to be in there signing up for the next volunteer event. Let's make the most of it. I worked with another conservancy group that their volunteer events on the weekends they were relaxed, to say the least. They were almost kind of rowdy on how informal it was. It was a blast. I actually got to attend one of them, and when working with the organization, I noticed that the online experience, like the registering for the events or hitting the landing page or the emails they were sending out, they were all like, super buttoned down. It was such a contrast. It wasn't congruent, right? I told them, I joked with them that like signing up for volunteering with you is like going to ask my mom if I could go out and play, right? So we worked on that in terms of bringing that vibe, if you will, of offline, that weekend into those touch points to make them more meaningful. Again, underlying goal is to make the online experience as valuable as possible for the volunteer. So again, we can set the stage for them becoming more involved. So again, looking at and refining those online and in-person volunteer interactions. And there's lots of organizations that have many, many different roles within their volunteer team, right? Some more formal than others. You just got to find that sweet spot that reflects that. So again, we're looking for consistency, branding, tone, terminology. I've seen places where they're talking about one thing online and another thing on site, right? And then obviously meaningfulness, and we're going to talk more about that. So impact reporting, obviously very effective, both from the donation side of the house as well as the volunteers, right? It creates that sense of connection, gratitude, appreciation, at least in the case of volunteers. And, it's a great motivator for deeper engagement. And that's exactly what we're looking for, right? We're looking for deeper engagement, for that getting more involved. If used correctly, it promotes that shared purpose of the volunteer team, which in my mind is absolutely important, because that shared purpose is the core of the culture, right? And if we can promote that and we can help mold that through the communications that we're providing and having with them, all the better, right? So statistics, often used for impact communications, total number of volunteer hours. I see this a lot. An organization, states, hey, we did 1,527 hours cumulatively last month. I understand why that's an important statistic internally, right? We need to manage the service levels that we're providing to our mission, right? Totally get it. But from individual volunteers, it's just not meaningful, right? Imagine walking into a quiet room where a patient's eyes light up at the familiar face of a hospice volunteer. This moment of connection happened 3,964 times last year or this year. Now that's a stat, I mean, that's hit you over the head. Because if you're a hospice volunteer, you know exactly what they're talking about. In fact, I think the person who wrote this is a hospice organization in the West. I imagine the person who wrote this is either a volunteer or spends their time around volunteers a lot, because boy, they focused in on what is an absolutely meaningful thing that the volunteers encounter every time they volunteer. So here's a challenge. So ask 5, 10 volunteers to describe to you, not what it is, but describe to you the very thing about volunteering that they love, like the moment or the very thing that has them say, yes, this is good, right? This is why I'm here. This is why I volunteer. And whatever they say, write it down, because that's the key to, in this case, a stat. And it's the key to the meaning of the communications that you'll be having and the content that will be used both offline and online is gold in my mind. So obviously, to a volunteer, the number of total volunteer hours, not meaningful. Moments of connections with hospice patients, absolutely priceless. So stories. We as humans are hardwired for stories. We are moved by them. They are, think of movies, think of YouTube. If done right and with the right cast of characters, right? You have the success stories, the comebacks, the hero stories. Ideally, our story should have both. If done right, it's in a very effective way of connection and showing the impact with volunteers. So, of course, one of the most epic examples of these is the animal rescue videos that many organizations create, right? It's the ones that have the the Christina Perri music in the background. I love you for 1,000 years. I love you for 1,000 more. I mean, it is impossible to make it through one of these videos without getting all choked up. Can't do it. So, if you watch one of these videos, you're just moved, right? You want to be a part of that. But let's say you're a volunteer at this organization. You watch the video. How moved are you? How proud are you? Right? How willing would you be to share that with your friends? Hey, hey, Dad, or hey, this is. You asked me what I did last weekend. What I do when I'm volunteering. This is it. Take a look at this video, right? So the connection is huge because you have it all. You have the comeback, right? That cute pup right there, and then you have the hero, right? Your volunteer, and people love to be heroes in a story, and we all agree volunteers are heroes. Let's provide them that ability. So communicating impact is extraordinarily effective at setting the stage for inviting our volunteers to take the next step, to become more involved. So we have the meaningful content, right, from the previous step. I've maybe done some research. Impact communications are all set up. Now it's time to figure out, hey, who are we targeting and what are the journeys? So obviously segmenting the obvious ones, right? New versus long-term volunteers, maybe by role, obviously very worthwhile. Perhaps if you have certain volunteers interested in certain things, then we can parse it out. Perhaps it's looking at other communications going out, and can we segment volunteers within that? Let's say if you have a 5K, people participating, you're sending out a nice email to say thanks to the participants, and hey, how hard is it to segment out your volunteers? Hey, Martin, really appreciate all the things that you do every weekend. And again, we can kind of merge in there, conservation wise, or last month, or whatever it is. And the fact that you went to the 5K, we really appreciate it. Thank you. Right? It's a little extra segmentation. It might be some extra content, but the impact is real.
I've got another question here, Chris.
Sure.
I'm just wondering. They're wondering whose responsibility is it to create the content that goes out. I'm thinking maybe it depends on the size of the organization. Maybe there is an internal comms team and they might do it, but I suppose just looking at a non-profit that perhaps has a couple of operational functions, one being volunteering and another being donations, in terms of curating that message, what would your advice be there?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I mean, I've worked with organizations that, you know, one person's wearing all these hats, so they do it, right? And up to much larger, such as that healthcare organization I work with, two very separate groups, right? The fundraising group creating their content, volunteer group doing their thing. In an ideal world, collaboration, right? Because, you know, the fundraising folks might be better at and have more tools of communication that we need to take advantage of, right? Email being the obvious one, maybe the website as well. So again, it almost comes back to, can you articulate the vision? Do we have an executive sponsor, or maybe a business plan? And part of that plan is, hey, Susan and Bob are going to connect, one on each side, donor side, volunteer side, and you know, come up with the content and even the segmentation on it. But it's a great question, and it gets sticky, because a lot of times, hey, you're not touching my email, well, you're not touching my donor list, right? It's kind of trying to get over those hurdles and that separation of groups, those silos, and again, articulation, executive sponsor, business plan can help that.
In my experience in marketing and communications, I don't think anything has ever not been improved by asking other people within a team, whether that's product development or whatever it is, whatever you work. If you're producing content, it's almost like the more voices that you get that come from an educated place in understanding the audience that you're trying to speak to, the better that message is, the more refined that message is. It normally takes one person in particular to boil it down to a very neat message. That might be like a brand manager or something like that, somebody that really works in that sector, to go bang, there's your thing. But they don't get that line until you've picked at different parts of the organization and understood what they're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. And it almost, in this case, again, turning doers into donors, it's almost mutually beneficial, right? The folks on the donation or fundraising side who are maybe creating the content for the e-appeals or sending out, you know, thank you emails to the 5K, for example. If they're on board with, you know, potentially soliciting and cultivating your volunteers, they hopefully want your feedback on the best verbiage, the best meaningful content from the volunteer group, and vice versa, right? If not quite the same way, but if I'm the volunteer manager and you're pinging my volunteers, you bet I want to be a part of that. I mean, that's a motivation for me to ensure that we're doing it right. Because being, you know, again, I've never met the head of the volunteers who aren't protective of the volunteers, like incredibly protective. So it could be, again, how we approach it and a collaborative thing where it's mutually beneficial. Oh, that's a great question. So if you're fortunate enough to have a volunteer portal that allows almost like a pre-programming, I call it touch sequences that can be you know, put into the application where messaging and emails are automatic. For example, you know, Rosterfy does this very, very well, I think, with milestones and certain triggers being tripped at certain points, right? So, for example, it could be, and again, any of these segments could apply essentially. You know, the new volunteer maybe gets some special messaging and an email after their first shift or event, and then maybe it's their fifth one, right? Maybe it's after 1 month of being a volunteer, maybe it's a year anniversary, right? Whatever it is that your volunteer culture and traditions warrant, right? Conveying what is most meaningful to the volunteer during those times is, you know, obviously cultivates the relationship, lays the foundation for getting more involved later on. So again, you can use new volunteer path. It could be for someone who's been there for quite a while. Maybe it's their 100th event, right? Or specific things they're interested in, or a survey that they've filled out within the portal. So again, tools like that, it's a little bit of upfront work to plan what those journeys are, but boy, they pay dividends because they scale so well. So additional thoughts. I mentioned before business plan, and again, it doesn't have to be 16 pages and all formal. I mean, unless you're talking about a multi-year project and vision. But even if it's executive summary, having the vision, whatever the data, situations, and segmentation that you might be thinking, and the plan, right? Maybe some examples of the meaningful impact communications you're talking about. It's going to go a long way. It's going to help you get an executive sponsor, being able to articulate that. And with that executive sponsor, if you get the buy-in, you have the air support, right? And that helps with everything. It's content creation that was mentioned before, who does what, and obviously getting that cooperation between, I'm not going to say warring departments, but departments that are quite separate. That could be, and I've seen many projects, many great ideas never make it to reality because it got stuck in the trenches, and by the time they bubbled it up, it was too contentious for a executive to kind of give blessing diplomatically, right? Have the executive sponsor first, get the buy-in, and then you can walk in and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, to another department, and Bob's on board or Sarah's on board with this as well, and we really like your thoughts about it, right? To make sure we're doing the right thing. That's a great way to broach the topic rather than kind of, again, walking in and saying, hey, we're sending an email to your volunteers and it's going to be for a donation. Volunteer surveys, if done well, can be a great source of information. It could be a source of that meaningful, impactful information that we're looking for, and what is the core of the reason of what they do. From my perspective, I think talking about it with volunteers is probably more effective, but hey, surveys can give you insights, especially on your current culture and morale even of your volunteers. And taking a larger step back, if you're looking at volunteer culture and how to improve it, or even how to recreate it, there's a book out there by Owen Eastwood called Belonging, and it was suggested, or I found out about this book from a university soccer coach who was raving about it a few weeks ago. So as you can see, I'm a sucker for a good read, so I had to get it. And both my kids play soccer, my wife plays soccer, so I love sports, but I started reading it, and I couldn't stop thinking about the implications to the nonprofit space from a culture standpoint. And even though the book is focused on sports teams, right, the carryover, particularly to volunteer teams, I think was pretty enlightening. And I got nothing, I have no connection to Owen Eastwood. It's just, again, I'm passionate about reading this, and I'm passionate about nonprofits. So the connection with this book was pretty neat. I'm looking forward to applying it in the future. But again, if you're looking for revitalizing culture, even recreating culture, a great read. So again, all of these, ideas, all the things we just talked about, we're looking to set the stage, setting a relationship. And it doesn't matter if it's, this is a 1-month plan or a 2-month plan or a 2-year plan. The approach is still the same. You're going to work with what you have and make sure we're using the most meaningful, impactful communication and taking advantage of all those touch points that we're interacting with our volunteers to set the stage for a successful reception to the invitation for volunteers to get more involved. So Martin, might be a good time to open it up for general questions.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I've been checking the Q&A section. We've not had any additional questions come in, but I know that we can do a follow-up afterwards if we have any questions that come in that can be replied to that, and I can pass that on to you, Chris, and we can follow up separately.
Sounds great.
Cool. Okay.
Well, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, ideas, I love to talk. This is my passion. So please reach out. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for attending this morning, your time, or afternoon, or wherever you are in the world when you're watching this. We will follow up afterwards with a link to a document that covers a lot of what Chris covered today. So there'll be some good tips in there that you can action within your team, and start encouraging more doers to be donors, build more of a community that both is represented both in donations and in the skills and the time that they offer as well, but done the right way, making sure that you're communicating, making sure that you're amplifying the impact that you're doing to your volunteer community to make them want to be part of not just giving time, but also being part of the mission too. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you everybody for attending, and as always, these recordings will be available on our website, but if anybody wants to reach out to Chris or find out more about SJ Consulting, I encourage you to visit their website at www.sjconsulting.us, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you everybody.